So today we are talking about outsourcing. What goods and services do you, the listener, outsource to professionals and experts that possibly you could do for yourself? We'd love to hear what your experience is with this, and call us, please, at 415-663-8492. When I've heard the word outsourcing, it's mostly been in connection with international business movement of jobs this is now outsourced from China or from India, and that's the predominant way we think about it. We're losing jobs to other countries where they're willing to do it cheaper. I pull that concept back to me and my household, and I think I outsource like 95% of my life. And I've tried to even make lists and stuff of all of the things that I go to other people for to get done, and I'm estimating it 200, but it could be 1,000. I don't really know. It's just crazy. And I think there was a day when people outsourced a lot less. Maybe they had 10 other people in the community with whom they had to exchange for their shared division of labor and the benefits. The benefits of outsourcing are almost always you hire someone who's more expert at this service, or making this good than you are. They can produce a whole bunch of them for a lot less cost than each of those people who buy them could on their own. So it makes sense that from an economic standpoint, we're always looking for that commodity that competitively priced allows us to have more goods and services. So we all crave this outsourcing culture. So when we hear the word consumerism, that's what I think of. I think about it as we are now addicted to this network of outsourced providers for us as individuals.
Well, you're tapping into, if you're talking about things like plumbing and stuff like that, repairs to the house, you're tapping into skills that other people might have that would avoid perhaps the deluge that might happen if you tried to fix your own plumbing just because you didn't necessarily know what you were doing. And if these guys are like myself, if they're doing it every day, it's easy for them. They come in, half an hour later they're gone, your plumbing's fixed and everything's good, whereas you might have been going back and forth to the store and doing all that. So
no question.
It probably ends up being cheaper anyway.
Well, I do the same. I'm not suggesting that I can get unhooked from this.
Right.
But let's just take this plumber example, because when you bring him in for that half hour, you're also responsible for what that plumber relies on in terms of products that are manufactured, the energy that went into their manufacture, the whole systems of the building permit and what those standards are is a superstructure that you've bought into that you're dealing with. And when you really look at the plumbing fixtures, these are very complicated things anymore.
Sure.
It's what happened to the good old days where we had a compostable outside
well pump.
toilet and well pump. Obviously, that was not as efficient as turning the faucet or flushing the toilet.
Well, and I think another key factor here of the value of outsourcing and why we outsource is time, and that, the world has changed so much. 50, 60 years ago, you usually had one member of a household, usually the female, staying home. So they were handling things on the home front. Now it takes two or more incomes in a household to keep a family running. So you've got people running short of time. So they're outsourcing not only the things that need to be done around their house or housekeeping or landscaping or yard work, but they're also outsourcing things like cooking by, grabbing a roast chicken or grabbing fast food or getting a pizza for the family for dinner because she didn't have time or he didn't have time to go out and make that. So it's also kind of that our lives have gotten into this frenetic pace that requires us to try to give ourselves more time. And
that's an interesting one, because I think over time there's been sold the idea that every bit of appliance that we can buy for our kitchen or every new tool is going to be a time saver. So over time, we've that started with got to have a toaster, you got to have a microwave or whatever it is, and now we got to have like 200 of these things to cook for ourselves, or we go out and we go to a kitchen that has 100 times more capacity than our own kitchen. But it's like amazing at how what used to be, let's say, the housewife's duty while raising the children of preparing the food and stuff, without all these tools, somehow got it done. And now we have to still send out for pizza.
But, and when you look back at the old, earlier writings and the suffragette movement and the suffrage movement, that was considered what mind-numbing, slave-like labor. That it was. And if you think about it, I'm someone who loves to cook. But, when you have to cook every single day, and provide 3 meals a day for people, and I've done that at times when I've been working, swapping out at a fly fishing lodge or something, it's not fun. It becomes not fun. So we don't necessarily want to go back to where we were, but we want to, I think, Bernie, explore.
Well, I'm a problem because I could eat out every day. The problem is if no longer those restaurants were there, I'd starve to death because I've not cultivated that ability to provide for myself.
And it was funny, there was an interesting article in Edible San Francisco back last in the winter, like in December, and it was something about I hate to cook, or it was a backlash against this whole movement of all of us who know how to cook that say, oh, it's easy and you should have family dinner every night, and all this guilt that comes upon people about that, cooking and having family dinner every night. And those of us who like to do it and know how to cook, we're like, it's so easy. It'll just like Paul could say to me, it's so easy to fix your car, Robin. It's like, not to me. It's not.
Would you just call in for an appointment, don't you?
Yeah. So looking at, I just shared this story with you guys earlier, but looking at when I went back home to visit, and my sister, we wanted to get together on a work night after work for her husband, and have dinner with my nephew who's autistic. So he comes over from the group home, and we were going to have a nice dinner. And my dad said, I'll pick up roast chicken from wherever. And my sister says, I'll get the potato salad from wherever. I said, well, I'll make dinner. We'll have, homemade dinner since I'm on vacation and I don't get to cook for my family. I'll make the dinner. I'll roast some chickens and make homemade mashed potatoes. But what actually ended up happening is I could see that it made them feel judged and made them feel uncomfortable as some things unfolded throughout the evening. That it was sort of like me saying, oh, no, don't go do all that. I'll make dinner, as if all that was bad. And there's a level of sensitivity, I think, also.
Well, it's they obviously do that habitually, and it's part of the routine.
Yeah.
The same would happen if I went back home when my parents were alive, and I'd cut grapefruit differently or something. It would be this, how dare you cut that grapefruit that way?
Didn't we teach you proper?
And then I also, what I did too, which I realized was offensive, was I went like, oh my gosh, I found this guy from White Oak Pastures that's back in the Southeast. I was able to find his true pasture-raised chickens, and I was able to get green beans from a small farmer who's like up the road. And so I was explaining, these potatoes were from Joe, and this Silver Queen corn,
wonderful.
Jim grew on the island, and blah, blah, blah. And you can just see the looks on their faces like, will she please shut up? There's this, so also that whole thing of taking the time out to outsource, like, if I go to Safeway or I go to a big store, then I'm outsourcing the hunting and gathering piece. If I go to, I go over to Zerlot's to go get my crab meat, and I go over to this person to go get the beans. That work
You're sourcing more consciously, right?
Yeah, but if you go to a grocery store, they've sourced for you. Like say for me, I have Good Earth here, so they do a pretty good job of sourcing what I like. The Palace does a pretty good job. So that's another way we outsource. We outsource our hunting and gathering activities by going to stores. And if we're lucky, we have good stores near us. And if we're not, that's kind of sad.
Well, no, it's great that you were bringing a bit of West Marin culture to your homeland.
And that's how we always were in our homeland.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's
until 30 years ago.
What you're saying is kind of disappointing to me, because it feels like the Midwest is everywhere now. It's I've never even been to the Midwest. How dare I say that? But it's that conglomerate. It's that
industrialization.
the American thing, industrialization of food, and just going along with the choices that are made for you, and to go to the store instead of actually doing stuff for yourself.
And in people's defense,
For
if you look
food.
at their
Food.
lifestyle, neither of them get home till 6:30. They have a disabled son. They have, so during the week, it's pretty impossible. Now, on the weekends, they do cook.
Yeah.
But, so you see also how our lifestyles get in these ruts that make it really difficult to not be outsourcing things.
Yeah. Well, so this is Let's Talk Radio with hosts Bernie, Stefan, Robin Carpenter, and I'm Paul Raffel. Please call us on 415-663-8492 and tell us if you believe we should be considering alternative ways of living, socializing, producing resources like our food, housing, and transportation rather than outsourcing so much of our living. You can also tweet us on @Let'sTalk on KWMR with your thoughts and opinions. Give us a call.
Well, as I was thinking about outsourcing, I chose the logo having to do with SKUs and universal product codes and barcodes and the way our consumer economy now has made it so convenient for us to stack inventory, ship, purchase, through the scanning and the high technology. That's really enabled an incredible efficiency across the board to let all products be even cheaper when you go through that system. Farmers market, we're not doing that. There's a sign that says $5, and it's pretty clear. On these others, it's like the price may change every day now. And so we've gotten into this hyper-consumerism. And indeed, I think because it makes us feel that we have a million choices, in the end, I'm worried that we'll have less choices because if that system collapses, where are the local alternatives to fill in? I feel very fortunate in West Marin that from a food standpoint, we've got your consciousness, Robin, and that of most of the community is much more aware of where their food's coming from. Most people believe it's coming from Safeway. Because that's where it's coming from. And what Safeway does may or may not be right. Just like this morning I was watching Democracy Now! Again, and there's this talk about the annual meeting of the shareholders of ExxonMobil, and the protesters pointing out how their scientists many years ago knew that climate change was primarily caused by the burning of the fossil fuels, and then they sought to ignore that, cover that up, or worse, whatever. But in a way, I feel like we're outsourcing that responsibility to that industry. And I would rather us as consumers come back and see ourselves as connected to that industry. That ExxonMobil is not bad guys. Well, we're good guys. And they cheated us by not telling us something that was not in their business self-interest earlier.
It's the corporate model that's the problem. And so we're back to resiliency and self-sufficiency. If it all does fall apart, and sooner or later it's bound to, because that's what happens to civilizations. Who will be left? How are we going to look after ourselves?
We've got a caller. Hi, caller, you're on the air. What's your name?
This is Uncivilized Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
Hi,
we like
Charlie.
uncivilized.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the conversation. As Paul knows, I'd rather, go jump off the bridge than have anybody change the oil on my vehicles. Because I've gone to those places that was an industry that was created, who say, okay, we'll change your oil in 15 minutes. Though, of course, they don't talk about waiting lines. And they also do all this stuff like offer you a latte, and then do you want your antifreeze check? Do you want your differential oil check? No, I just want you to change my oil, okay? And so...
you don't get a haircut at the same time?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they offered it, But the thing is that I do change my own oil on my vehicles, and I have to say that I feel kind of a kinship with them. I've always felt tight, especially with my work truck, and I've always wept when they finally gave it up and had to be hauled away, But there is something about doing that stuff for yourself. I think, housekeeping, that's another thing, though. I think there's a whole separate industry that's been created by the fact that so many people have to work so much, that they do want to come home to a clean house, so they're willing to pay somebody to come in and do housekeeping for them,
Because we can. On the car thing, Charlie, isn't it problematic for you, and it is for me, that less and less people are able to service their cars? I mean, they're all requiring computers, it seems, to get anything done.
Yeah, that's really... that's really, I mean, it's always nice to pop the hood on an old vehicle. And
you're lucky you can change the oil. That's the last thing left.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, I know, Charlie, our two vehicles are, one's 16 years old and one's 15 years old, and one has, I think 220,000 miles, and the other has 250. And one of the reasons I don't want to get rid of them is because they're the computers. So most thing that they can be pretty well worked on, and being the daughter of a mechanic, it's just the idea of even my favorite mechanic can't work on my car because it's got so much computer and electronics information and codes that you have to have. Our mechanic for the Volvo was saying it's getting so expensive for him now to buy the different computer systems to work on the cars, and then he has to have a special license that he pays every year, a fee to these people to be able to work on the cars.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's a nightmare to me.
Look how much easier it was in Cuba, where they're able to keep the old cars and keep fixing them up, and how wonderful they look now. And that will be destroyed once we have trade relations again.
Yeah. But anyway, that was just one example that I thought I would offer up.
Cool. Yeah.
Sort of engage, on purpose. Of course, I get paid to crawl around and hit things with hammers and stuff. So
You're Mr. Fix-It, aren't you, Charlie?
That would be me.
Yes. But we need more Mr. Fix-Its because most of us have lost the ability to fix things. So you're definitely a needed service here in our community.
Amen.
Amen.
Right. Well, my ad's in the light.
Okay. Check it out.
I'm really enjoying. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so Charlie's bringing up household goods. Cleaning is a big one. Do people still go out to laundries? How about child rearing? Have we outsourced that as parents?
Pretty much. I mean, I think, if you're both parents are working, you have to be paying for childcare. And I know one of the things that was hard for me as a single mom was that.
Yeah. And as you say, although I seem to remember you were talking about your old cars, one of them decided it was going to be really clever and lock you inside and you couldn't get out.
Oh, that's right. The Land Rover had this thing called Super Lock that if you do something, that it literally locks you in the car and you cannot escape. And normally at the Land Rover dealerships, they've been disabling that. And thank God I could reach my phone because I couldn't literally move out of my seat. I couldn't move the seat back. I couldn't. So I was literally trapped and you wouldn't let me unroll the window. Nothing. And if I tried to touch anything, the alarm just kept going off. So I called, first I called AAA and they said, oh yeah, we're just going to have to break the window open. And then they said, do you want us to just call the police for you? Because normally we consider this a pretty dangerous situation.
Yeah, you could have called 911.
And so she said, how are you doing? I said, well, it's been 20 minutes. I'm a little panic attacky. So it was a very trying time.
Yeah.
So I think we've got another caller.
Yeah.
Caller, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Hey.
Hi, who's this?
I'm getting some kind of other feedback here on the phone, but I just wanted to address the issue about cars and not being able to work on them. My husband and I have decided to only drive vehicles that we can work on. And so therefore that eliminates a lot of these problems and automation, as well as it puts the power back in the hands of the consumer.
Very good.
Also recycling, we're recycling vehicles.
How are you as far as getting car parts? How does that work for you guys?
It's not an issue at all. We have a local. We live in Calistoga, and we love KWMR. And
cool.
And so we have local auto parts stores as well. There's so many resources online and magazines. The newest car that we own is a 1956.
Wow.
And so it's a joy to drive vintage cars as well.
It's interesting. You open the hood on those things, and there's just an engine in there.
Yeah.
And the carburetor. There's no fuel injection. There's no automatic locking doors to trap you in. No, it's very basic, and therefore, like you were mentioning, that we can't work on the new computerized cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They've removed that ability from the consumer, and so we've taken it back into our own hands, and we have a great time driving old cars.
Well done.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to have to convince my husband of that because while we were on vacation, we had a nice brand new rental car that my iPod, fit in and all this stuff. And Andy was saying, wouldn't you like a new car? Because he's not the daughter of a mechanic and he's never had to have such old cars. But I love that, we get, sometimes Paul's helped us and then Cheetah's here in town. And so, yeah, being able to, I don't know, it just, especially, my apocalypto self, when the apocalypse comes, you'll be driving.
Correct.
Until the gas runs out.
As long as we can access the gas.
The gas, yeah.
Right. But yes, anyway, and so we have a really great time. We made this decision about 6 years ago. I had a lovely Subaru that I loved so much, and had all the bells and whistles and sunroof and everything, and it became problematic, and we just kept chasing a problem, and I said, stop, we're done with mechanics, we're going to do this ourselves. And so we bought cars that we could work on.
Excellent.
Great. Well, good for you guys.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one way is to commit to recycling the old ones, and therefore we're not, being part of the production line of all the new ones that require an awful lot to produce a car.
Right.
No kidding.
Great. Well, thanks for calling us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Another thought on the subject.
Oh, sure. We lost
Oh,
her.
my goodness.
Well, we'll call her Ms. Calistoga.
Yeah, I was thinking a couple of thoughts came to mind as our caller, and I wish I knew her name. She talked about local auto parts store. Well, that's kind of interesting because whether your retail auto parts store is local, obviously those parts come from all over the globe.
Yeah.
And I don't know of anybody who is actually, if you really wanted to take that concept down to the level of locally produced parts, maybe we should think more in terms of bicycle because, again, with that fossil fuel energy that maybe with a diesel you can run on your fried oil. But, you're going to have trouble with all that complexity of parts that come from so many nations. I mean, when we talk about outsourcing, the auto manufacturers do so much of that. And, of course, it's all based on where can they get this product to their standard and specification manufactured the cheapest.
The cheapest price, yeah.
And so that complexity is the opposite of resilience. And unless you are machining your own parts, I'm afraid that as much as the automobiles you can work on are definitely better and more resilient than the ones that are on computers. And if you don't have any juice in your battery, that's a worthless machine. And I'm afraid we are losing the skills or the ability to even exercise those skills. But I have this feeling that we kind of enjoy not having to do all that. Use the word mundane a little while back, tasks. And, pretty much everything after you do a lot of it gets mundane. So the way we have it is everyone specializes in something, so they spend their whole life doing one thing. How mundane is that?
Well, and I think, we've forgotten about, when I was a single mom and my friends would go, how is it that you are able to, cook most of your meals and things like that? I said, well, first of all, we make it fun. Going to the farmer's market to get stuff on a Sunday afternoon is when we'll make some pasta sauce and some other things we put in the freezer. And that doing things together, like cooking or shelling peas or whatever you're doing, making that part of your social fabric and sort of part of, like, for Andy and I, us cooking dinner together at night, that is like a fun activity for us most nights. And also, I think other things too is, finding the things that you're good at. So I'm good at cooking, so maybe I swap off. I'll do 4 meals for you to put in your freezer if you'll come fix this or that, or, that kind of thing as well, that in the community, if you have a mix-up. And what I actually ended up doing when my son was little was I found 2 other moms. Our boys all ran track. So we would swap picking the boys up and cooking dinner so that we only had to cook once or twice during the Monday through Friday week as the moms. But it meant every night we had a home-cooked meal for the boys and us to sit down. Yeah. So being creative so that it doesn't become this drudgery thing, too, is
no question. I mean, I think that kind of bartering is at a different scale. That's that human scale where you're working with the folks in your community where you find, if I do this for you, and that isn't always around money either. I mean, this other system that is so outsourced to the industrial infrastructure. It has so many levels. I mean, it's clear that we all don't need to grow everything that we eat. We obviously, but if we all could grow something, it would be good.
And
if we could all sow something, if we could all help, like if we needed to build a house here, do we have all of the people that could come from all of the trades, except maybe the lawyers and the people who need the permits and all that stuff, to come put that thing together?
And one of the things to me that's so impressive about folks that are growing or producing or harvesting our food is that most farmers, ranchers, fisher folks, they have to know how to do everything. They have to know how to be a mechanic. They know how to have to be a carpenter or a plumber. They've got to have so talk about some of the most important people in a community. It is your farmers, ranchers, fisher folk. I mean, they do it all and know how to do it all, and that's just part of their lifestyle. Sure. Is being able to do all those tasks. It's the only way that these smaller growers and farmers and harvest people can make a living or make a profit. They can't afford to be outsourcing.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And there's also the culture of helping each other, which is a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. Music and art. Those are. I was thinking about that. People used to make their own music, and they'd sit at home and do needlepoint or whatever, or make
their own
things.
entertainment.
Right.
Yeah, and the thought nowadays is that we've got to listen to absolutely the most exquisite, like if it comes down to orchestra in the world, which city has the best orchestra, that's the one we got to listen to, or which athlete can perform the triathlon, the fastest and the best and the whatever, instead of looking at Love Field, instead of looking at Tamales High School and cheering on at the school the kids with their art displays, or at our civic center for the county level. I mean, we have an opportunity to enjoy art that's locally produced and encourage people in our village. We have the ability to entertain ourselves. I mean, I was told I can't sing, so I don't. And so, for us, there's a lot of stuff coming over the internet or coming over the TV that is our outsourced entertainment. And I kind of sometimes wish if the electricity went out, and we've had to do that, and we go nuts because we're so addicted.
We just make sure that Paul's still distilling. So, it's interesting. One of the things I loved was my Aunt Gladys, who would tell me stories about growing up in the 20s and 30s in a rural town in Alabama. And one of the things the kids used to do on a Saturday is they were in a one-room schoolhouse. They would go by the teacher's house and beg her to let them borrow the key to the schoolhouse so they could go inside and play piano and sing. I mean, that was their entertainment. And sometimes the teacher would say, last time you left it messy or whatever, but that was their big exciting thing when the teacher would allow them to have access to the piano and go sing.
Nice.
And just these, and my grandmother used to talk about in the summer when it would be so hot that there was a limestone cave not far from where they were growing up, and they would take candles and stuff and go down to the cave, and people would bring whatever they played, their guitar or whatever, and they would go dance in the cave because it was like air conditioning in the cave. Right. And and I just remember hearing all those stories as a child and thinking how magical those things are. And when I was on this vacation, Andy's not much for playing games, and I adore games. I'll play board games till the cows come home. And so I kept thinking, what's the game I can hook him with? So I finally hooked him with dominoes. So that was like when we were, for 5 days, we were at my favorite place on earth, Dauphin Island, which is a barrier island between Mobile Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. And so we just played board games and dominoes and sat out on the patio. I think we turned on the TV once or twice just because I wanted my political fix. But we were not, we just, that's what we did.
Remember when we outsourced, like we had a question, we didn't know how to do something or we didn't understand something, and we'd have to go around to our friends or maybe go to the library and the card catalog, and, we'd have to do a lot of interaction, and maybe we'd have to call on some elders, like, how did you guys do this? And then Google came along, and, now have we outsourced our ability to ask other people something directly?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
that's the one thing I will say. Andy and I did not let our cell phones leave our side because we would be having a conversation while we're playing dominoes, sitting by the beach, and then Andy go, how did ships become? Why is one side called port and one side called starboard? We would have a question, then we go like, oh, and we immediately Google.
Yeah.
It's like we no longer ever have to live with mystery or questions, which is kind of having that instantaneous answering ability is something Annie and I are very hooked on. I have to say, that's the one
Well,
thing.
I'm hooked on my iPhone, no question about it. My wife, Jerry, and I went to the Giants game yesterday. They won in the 10th inning. It was a lot of fun. But I was watching around, and at least 50% of the adults had their cell phones out a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I did check my email. I did look on Facebook. I got
It's baseball. You're
and it's
supposed
like, but then you have people taking selfies and pictures of each other and all that kind of stuff. But we're so all engaged in that now. I find that at any given moment, the people actually watching the ball game was the minority. Most people were engaged in something else, but at least a lot of that was person to person. And with the kids, of course, it's not about the game. It's about the space and et cetera. And it's fun to watch. It's a good people watching experience. But I really fear that our digital virtual world, that whole economy is removing us once again. I mean, we've been removed generation after generation from the skills that once were part of the human knowledge set.
Now, one thing, like a positive of technology, is you can go on YouTube and find a video of how to fix almost anything. So it is sort of acting as a repository for tribal knowledge that otherwise might be lost, because I think in our generation of the baby boomers, we really did kind of have that break from being connected to elders. And
But what I'm afraid is in electronic form, it's more vulnerable than even printed form. I'd rather actually have that knowledge be reposited in a printed book than in an e-book, because the e-book I don't trust will be around.
Or being passed down from generation to generation, from master to apprentice and all that sort of stuff.
There won't be a Google by then.
Right.
well, I think we have a caller. Let's check in. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, what's your name?
Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Your voice sounds familiar.
I was on the other line, and I could hear you. That's interesting. Anyhow, one of the things you said about looking up how to fix things on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm all for fixing things, and one of our local luminaries, Dave Brast, is the guy that really tells you how to fix things.
He's our Mr. Appliance guy.
Yeah, I mean, and those are the types of things that people just easily replace when oftentimes they can be repaired. So I had this great idea that I was going to buy this refrigerator with a freezer on the bottom, because if you think about it, the cold air falls to the lower part. Right. So that just seemed like
We have one of those. I like it.
Yeah, I like mine too, but it has this model of refrigerator has a sort of a problem. And so I went online. Of course, you look around online, you can find out that all these other people are having the same problem with their refrigerator that you are. And there's several videos that show you how to fix it, but it is a most complicated thing. So I've just basically stuck with chipping the ends out. I'm just doing the old style. But, I mean, sometimes these things can be helpful, but sometimes they're you just sort of adapt.
Yeah. Well, you've still got a fridge. You've still got a freezer, sort of? Or what? What's happening with it? I'll come over and fix it for you.
We'll have a David Brass, Paul Raffel, fix-off.
I just chip the ice out periodically, or we taking it out and dumping it on the plants. Because
wouldn't you like a horse-drawn carriage come by once a week with that block of ice and deliver it to you?
That sounds so...
Harsh, man.
All wrapped up. You read Little House on the Prairie, and you right back there. This is an interesting topic. It's interesting to hear, folks. I had a car once that I could fix, and I did enjoy that. I liked that. Now we have an electric car, and you can't even, you have to get the software updated.
Amanda, are you ready to talk about bikes, or are you still having pain?
I'm happy to talk about bikes.
Oh, great. Well, isn't that where we should be thinking about doing for ourselves?
Well,
I think it depends on the people, on the person, and where you live. And I mean, I think if I lived at the top of a hill, I would be less inclined to want to ride my bike someplace, knowing that on the way back I had to go up a 15% grade. I think we know that Bing got his electric bike to try to get back up to his house, but I don't know that he's stuck with that. And I think bicycling is an option, and it works well in some communities better than others.
Sure. You used to be more of an enthusiast before you had that crash.
No, I used to be more of an enthusiast before I moved to a community where it's not as feasible all the time. I mean,
that's true.
And when I lived in Palo Alto, that was a very flat place. I mean, it's easy to get around. I put 2,000 miles a year on my car. I mean, here we are in a place where it's a little less feasible, I think, for a lot of people to feel comfortable out on the roadways with the speed differential, et cetera. So
right.
I understand.
I wanted to tell you, Amanda, I just bought a new e-bike.
Oh, cool. I want to check it out.
An e-bike?
Well, yeah. It's an electronic bike to help me get up the hill that she's talking about. That's exactly my problem. And I've gotten up that hill twice now with the limited muscle power I have. But I wanted to tell everybody, and thank you, Amanda, I remember when you mentioned Bing and I were in your class that you were teaching us bicycle safety, and you helped get our bikes looking good and get us on the road. So
good. Well,
that has paid dividends.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad, and I'm no longer a certified instructor, but I'm happy to give tips.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Amanda.
Bye.
Yeah, so who is the local spoke maker? I mean...
Well, actually, Steve Potts, who lives here, Steve was sort of the inventor of the mountain bike. And he sold, I don't know if he's still making bikes, but he had a shop and he was hand-making bikes himself.
Wow, nice. There you go.
But my idea has been, I've tried to talk my husband into this, is to let me start a donkey dealership.
Right.
And that donkeys will be riding donkeys because they can do the hills and everything. Right. And go over the hill. It'll be a little longer. And that we could do it like Vespas. I was going to call it Vespa donkey. And you could have different colors donkeys. We could have different, like pink serapes on the back and for the girls. And,
I don't know.
So I'm trying to think like, how can I take advantage of the economic opportunities of the apocalypse? So I'm thinking donkey dealership.
I think donkeys is the exact right way to think. I mean, we had a much better dependence on animals before, and I think we will again. I think we will all learn to work with the animals in humane and good ways going forward.
And once again, my grandmother, the great stories about how they all rode their horses to go places when they were, growing up. And because I asked her, Mama, what does that mean, rode hard and put up wet? And one time, because I heard somebody say, so-and-so looks rode hard and put up wet. And I was like, what does that mean? And my grandmother explained about how they were taught, like when you bring your horse in and you've got to, dry them off and brush them down or they'll get sick. Right. But I remember thinking, like, she was just a little girl doing that.
Yeah.
On this outsourcing, I go personally to the level of thinking about how we've outsourced our thinking in many ways. We've outsourced our reasoning, our self-governance, and we've relied on law and government and institutions to do these things for us. And then we point to them for doing a bad job when the outcome isn't something we want. And I think we've disassociated ourselves from responsibility with them. And I want to go to schools again, too, because schools, in my mind, are teaching children to fit a certain job category or categories, and they take for granted a lot of the basic skills or the more into nature. I mean, some schools definitely have reclaimed the arts and brought music programs back, and with a lot of parent pressure, schools are more responding to this broader education. But I fear that the academic push, the Common Core idea of you must know all these things that are mostly abstract is a way of outsourcing the training of our children. And I would rather the children be spending more time with their parents, learning what they're seeing every day as their parents are doing their work. I'm a big fan of homeschooling, that insourcing of educating your children. And in the end, it isn't about the facts they learn at all. It's about their reasoning, their ability to be skeptical.
And learning to learn.
Learning to learn, learning to love to learn, because they get to pursue what they love, what they're passionate connection is at the moment. Typically, you allow the child to learn instead of saying, today the curriculum says I teach X, Y, and Z.
It's really interesting. I can't remember if it was Finland or Denmark, but it was recently kind of going around on Facebook how they completely revamped their educational system, that testing was showing that the kids weren't doing as well as they should. And so when they evaluated the whole thing, what they really realized was what we need to do is no homework and have the kids only be in class 3 hours a day. And that they need to be well fed, a breakfast and a lunch. So they come to school, they have breakfast, they study for 3 or 4 hours, they have lunch, and then they play. They're outside, they play, they go do stuff. That less school got the kid, and so the abilities of the children just went off the charts.
And that really increases a self-confidence that then also translate, if they have to go into an office, they already are grounded by that connection to nature that I think is actually better than if you spent all your time learning how to behave in an office.
Or training. I mean, my husband used to call it, we're training the kids to be cubicle slaves.
Sure,
exactly.
Fit in this box.
Yes.
I saw a really...
The system demands it.
Well, if you look, I saw a funny cartoon the other day that was cage, what was it? Cage-free offices. It was a sign somebody had. They had this as a lineup of the cubicles and everybody. And I thought, it's just sort of like chickens. Your cubicle should be big enough where you can turn around, spread your arms, or lie down. And we don't even have that for most humans. Working in those kinds of environments.
They don't want self-confident people with minds of their own who can think for themselves. They just that system. It's in Britain. It's all over Europe. It's the German system of turning out these sort of modules that could do certain things, but they do it quickly and quietly and will not make any trouble.
Yeah, modular is very efficient,
and we built it that way. The education system.
The standardization of everything in our society.
Yeah.
The fact that you look in the industry, one of the reasons that there is the competition at the level that gives us the cheap product is there's a standard. There's a standard in terms of how communications crosses the airwaves, or, there's at least 7 levels I remember learning about and forgotten most of that. But it's a highly, highly complex and specialized but standardized world. The internet is a standardized world. And it's all centrally controlled, and it cannot live on the kind of everybody locally doing what they want. But maybe we don't need that global system. Maybe we just need the
more
local...
we pull out, and we have had that happen. We have been in the food world voting with our forks, and it's making a difference. There were something like, 50 farmers markets 30 years ago, and now there are hundreds and hundreds of them, or thousands. And so we have to believe that we can make that difference. We can. Back when I was back home, I met with this fabulous family that's been producing seafood. They have their shrimp boat and their crab traps, and they've been doing great sustainable seafood on the coast for many years, and the business has changed. It used to be, she said, 35 years ago, people would come in when there was a big shrimp harvest, and they'd buy 50 pounds of shrimp, and they'd take it home and freeze it up in 1 pound blocks for dinners for their family, and that kind of thing. And now that's not happening, and she said people just don't appreciate or want the local. They'll just go into Costco and buy seafood from China instead of coming out there. And then she was saying, and I used to have this woman that bought all my she crab roe, and now I can't get it shipped to her easily. And I said, I know 2 chefs. I asked her, I said, do you know this restaurant and this chef and this? She said, no. I said, they would both love to have that. And they're 25 minutes away. And, and then I contacted them. So a lot of it is, they're kind of under siege, and it's that creative thinking. But once again, as you were saying, Bernie, it's bringing community together. So now these 2 people are connected, and they're like, wow, we didn't realize we could get, this local crab and the she crab roe. It's an old soup that used to be made that stopped to be made called she crab soup. And it's that way you're using every part of the crab. And so it's interesting because it's also just shifting those mindsets and doing that.
The doing it yourself movement. I understand that started in Great Britain. I read
DIY.
Yeah, and it probably relates to transition movement, reskilling, being more locally self-sufficient. That has grown, but what I fear is that now you can order online a package of do-it-yourself stuff. So it gets shipped in by FedEx, and then you put it together, and you've done it yourself. It reminds me of like when they were selling Betty Crocker cake mix, but they had to leave a step for the housewife to feel that she baked the cake.
So that brings up an interesting point that I may have said on the show before, so please forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But in the early 50s, when most American households were households of production, so people baked, they cooked, they fixed their own cars, they sewed, they made their children's clothes. The food industry, the processed food industry, saw what we have to do in order to change this is these people are learning this in school, in shop class, and in home economics.
Yeah.
And so they went to the home economics teachers, I think it was Betty Crocker, to try to get them to try their cake mixes. And the home economics teacher said, forget this. I can make a cake for half the cost of a box of cake mix.
Right.
Where I'm going to have to add an egg and water. That's not a good home economic decision. And so there was pushback, and one of the things that these groups tried to do is undermine and get shop classes and home economics classes out of the public school system.
Ooh.
Because that's how how's the first way you're going to make people be consumers and not makers? You're going to take away the knowledge and ability to be makers.
Did they do that like one school district at a time?
It was, my grandmother was a principal, and then she was head of the district. It was in Mississippi, and she said it was basically just this undermining, trying to get stuff in the classes, and then there was kind of an advertising put down, sort of like, people who take home economics are people that are going to be poor.
You're right,
that'll
right.
have to do that stuff. If you're going to be successful, and that was the advent of advertising going bananas.
Yeah.
So all that came together, and part of what they knew is you've got to take away the ability of people to take care of themselves.
Right. Well, and also, didn't we have mentors in generations before? That mentorship idea doesn't exist much anymore in our culture, does it?
And they had the apprenticeship concept.
Apprenticeship, yeah. Where somebody, as they're learning, they don't expect much pay, maybe just room and board. They come in and they do the odd jobs, but in the process, they're learning from the master how to do this particular skill. Why have we devalued that or lost that?
And I also think
it's lower class.
It's lower class. It's blue collar. You don't want to be blue collar. And this whole thing of everyone going to college. It used to be that college was for you went to college if you wanted to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, or you went to college because you had a passion for learning the liberal arts. Otherwise, you took up a trade. You learned how to do something, and you apprenticed. And then they made college, which is now the equivalent, sadly, of high school.
Right.
But then college became this thing. Everybody needed to go to college. Well, really, did they?
Where were the insurance analysts and the financial transactions managers come from, if not college? Don't we need all of those institutions?
But even back then, you would start working in a bank. My uncle was the president of a bank in Alabama, and he did not have a college degree. He was in the Navy, and he was interested. He got a job at a bank as a teller and worked his way up back in the day.
And that bank was locally
So did my brother.
owned and run, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was not part of FDIC and the bank bailout.
Well, I think almost all banks have FDIC to insure.
Oh, yeah. Now they do.
But No, it was a local bank.
Yeah.
And so he worked his way up in the bank. And that was the thing, too, is that this expectation that we've put on that everyone must now have a college degree in order to have to work at. When my son was in college, he wanted a job at Best Buy, and Best Buy said, you have to have your college degree. And here he's on a scholarship at Reed College, and they don't think he's qualified to work at Best Buy.
Man.
So, we've gotten sort of out of whack from the ground up.
And if you want to work in Silicon Valley, you've got to be under 30, or they can't trust you.
Sure. But isn't that college degree thing, it's another way of keeping the stratification between achievers and non-achievers, right? You're the underclass if you don't have a college degree.
It is. In many ways, school has been doing that for a long time. It's a way to separate those that will be more privileged in their later years from those that are going to have to
the ones who can't fix their own toilets.
That's right.
Exactly. But and college degrees now are the equivalent of what a high school degree was 35 years ago. I mean, we would get college graduates coming in when I worked at the radio station. We'd be hiring people. and they had majored in radio. I'm going like, radio is not a major. English is a major. Engineering is a major. You spent 4 years in college and all your parents' money to major in radio. You could have just gotten a job at a radio station. And these kids couldn't write a memo, and that just also goes to the point of what's happened in our public school systems, that if the kids coming out of high school had a good solid education, they wouldn't need to go to college to cope with life. They would go to college because they wanted a further education, or they wanted a specific trade like doctor, lawyer, school teacher, that kind of thing. So I encourage kids nowadays, if you aren't sure what you want to do, go to trade school. You can always go back to college. And besides, you can learn almost everything you want by Googling it.
If you have an interest, follow it and see where that takes you. Right?
Yeah.
And if you have a passion for something, of course go with that instead of trying to get a degree in something that maybe fits what you want to do.
I want to say one last word on this outsourcing from the standpoint of politics. If you go to the root meaning of politics, it's how people work together to solve problems and how to work together. And of course, we've now outsourced that into an electoral system and a system of representation that many people are unhappy with how it's unfolding, and this isn't the first year people are unhappy with their choices. It seems to happen perennially.
Outrageously complicated.
So in many ways, I'd like us to think about how much of our lives is outsourced. I started with the notion, and I still feel I'm addicted to all of this efficiency. I outsource about 100% of everything in my life, and I truly would like us to reclaim at least the thinking. And if we could get to having discussions that were community-wide. Thankfully, we have them on KWMR, we have a Point Raised Light, we have a West Marin Commons, we have many means, and we have the San Geronimo Valley list, we have the Facebook pages, we have lots of ways. I'm sure I'm not covering it, but let's source locally and let's think about what we're sourcing. So let me thank our listeners today and our callers for your participation, and I hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11 because your voice really does matter.